Hey, I'm back. When we last left off, we were talking about abstract expressionism. And mentioned Helen Frankenthaler and slide number 9 in the PowerPoint. Unprimed canvas, soft, large areas of color, uh, paint soaking into the canvas. It's really a feeling of softness about this that you didn't get with some of the other paintings that we looked at by male artists. So sometimes using materials in such a way could become a way of expressing aspects of one's identity, like gender or race. Slide number 10 is by a Spanish painter named Robert Motherwell, and the subject of many of his paintings was the horror of the Spanish Civil War. And if you look at the example here, you can almost get the idea of looking at a landscape from the air and seeing the shadows of planes as they fly overhead, which of course during wartime could be a horrifying event. Slide number 12 is a piece by Robert Rauschenberg, and Rauschenberg used not only paint and traditional art materials, but things that he'd find in his everyday environment. So things that he might see when he's walking down the street become part of these multimedia pieces. So it's not just relying on one particular medium, and by utilizing things that are physically part of the real world outside of art, in some ways he's breaking down those barriers between what's art and what's real life. Also, Rauschenberg is going to have a big influence on the pop artists in the movement that's coming shortly after this. Slide 13, another piece by Rauschenberg. So it's a combination of different mediums and different materials. It includes silkscreen, oil painting. Some of these pieces had copies of photographs. If you look in the upper left-hand corner of this one, you can see what probably started off as a news photograph of the conflict in Vietnam, which was then silkscreened onto this piece. Slide number 14 provides a link to a short interview with Rauschenberg, and he's a funny guy. Like I really think if I met him in real life, I would like him. He seems just to be very open and fun, and seems to have this very giving and playful sort of personality. So check that out. Slide number 15, another artist that was working with similar types of materials, and once again kind of breaking down that barrier between what you would consider part of the art world and what was part of most people's everyday lives. And sometimes that included objects that were found and put into a sculptural context. We talked some about how before the 20th century there were certain materials that were considered suitable for art, like oil paint and marble and bronze and all these things that were considered real art mediums, and nothing else was considered art, till the 20th century, when all these different objects start to appear in artistic works, and things are assembled sometimes out of castaway materials. So that is still at this time a fairly recent idea. Slide number 16 is a piece by Jasper Johns, and as opposed to Rauschenberg's kind of spontaneous compositions and line, Jasper Johns' pieces seem to be very planned out and very methodical. A lot of times he would use types of paint that would dry very quickly. This example is encaustic, which is pigment mixed with wax. And because that paint dries so fast, you can see every individual brush stroke. So instead of seeing a smooth over surface, you can really get the idea that even though this painting might be of something we think of as being a symbol, that it actually is created using paint, and it's created one brush stroke at a time. Slide number 17 is a photograph from a performance, and performance art is something that starts occurring during this time. It's related to the idea of action painting if you think about Greenberg's discussion of Jackson Pollock and how the art itself was the creation and the movement, and then what we're left with is an artifact. Performance art kind of takes that idea a step farther, and actually you have these performances or happenings where these things happen, and that was the art. And then what you're left over with is just an artifact of that. And in the case of Passing Through from 1956, the artifact would have been a stretcher with a ripped piece of paper on it. And you could display that in a museum, but you're not really displaying the art. The art's already happened. You're just displaying something that's left over in a way. Slide 18 gives you a link to Passing Through 2012, and this is when that famous performance art piece was reenacted, and it's on YouTube, so check it out. Slide number 21, another example of a type of performance art, a type of happening. This is a self-constructing, self-destructing work of art from 1960. So the artwork here actually ends up destroying itself. And that again is taking that idea of action painting or action art even farther, to where the artist is not the one performing the act, when the art itself is being the art. And again, all you're left over with is remnants of what once was, because the art has already happened. Interesting stuff. And on, it's actually slide number 19. On slide 20, there's a link to a video of that art piece, or one like it. Slide 21 is household. This is a performance. It's another example of unorthodox materials that are used to not really make the artwork, because the artwork is a performance, but to make the artifacts, to make the physical signifier of what's going on. The term pop art, as the name implies, is about pop culture. And pop, probably that term goes back to soda pop. The idea of this mass commodity, like you guys probably don't remember, but at one point there was a Coke versus Pepsi war, when these advertisements were coming up, which is better, Pepsi or Coke, and it was this big thing. And soda pop being a symbol for capitalist consumerism, and the idea that the whole society is based on buying things, having things made as cheaply as possible, packaged in some way that appeals to you, and then you can buy it and consume it. That system had a lot of critics. It still does today. But it also spurred this art movement, emboldened by this consumerist culture. You know, when you walk down the aisle in Walmart, for example, you see all the different labels and all the things that are trying to get your attention, and the idea that it's all kind of the same, even though it looks different. Slide number 23, good example of pop art. This is about popular culture at the time. We see different figures from magazines, from TV shows and movies, and the male figure holds a sucker that actually says pop on it. So that is a pretty good example of pop art. Number 24 is a piece by Roy Lichtenstein. And Lichtenstein many times would copy comic book frames. And it sounds a little easier than it is, because he would do these on a really big scale, and if you look closely at it, if you walk up to it, you can see that he has painted every dot. So when you look closely at a comic book, you can see that it's made using a dot matrix system, where you have all the little dots of color. Ralph Lichtenstein, actually copied each one of those dots in order to reproduce those comic book frames on a massive scale. And to him, there was something that was very uniquely American about some of these scenes and just these iconic kind of frozen moments. The next slide, Wham! From 1963, another piece by Roy Lichtenstein. And, again, this action and excitement and wham. There's something that's kind of fun about that word, too. Slide number 26 is actually the cover that's on your textbook. And this is called An Accumulation of Teapots. And this is actually sliced teapots in a plastic case. So the artist went out and acquired all of these similar looking teapots, cut them in half, and then put them in a case to make this collection, accumulation of teapots. It's about consumer culture. It's a commentary on the idea of consumption of goods. And as you guys know, the capitalist system has a lot of great things about it, but some of the not so great things about it include the idea that there's billions of teapots in the world, and most of them, are somewhere lying in landfills or garbage heaps now. Slide number 27, Claes Oldenburg, his approach to pop art was to make sculptural versions of things, but to make them using different materials. So the title of this piece, Two Cheeseburgers with Everything, is actually made out of burlap soaked in plastic. So it's all burlap soaked in plaster, painted with enamel. Not a hamburger. It's not really lettuce or tomato. It looks completely different, and it's a different take on those objects. By using different materials to put these things together, the artist encourages us to see it in a different way. So not just what we're told it is, which we're told this is food, but the way it looks, the physical presence that it has, it really makes you re-examine those types of ideas. Slide number 28, a still life, and we talked some about still life paintings in history, the way artists would use still lifes to showcase their ability to very realistically paint things. But this still life looks a little different, with cigarettes, Italian dressing, things in cans. It's as if the entire life experience has been prepackaged and photographed, and this painting resulted from it. Slide 29 is by Andy Warhol, who was probably the most well-known of the pop artists, and he was very famous, and that became part of his personality, the idea that he was a famous person. A lot of his work was about the idea of fame, and this one is called Marilyn Diptych. It is synthetic polymer paint and silkscreen on canvas. Warhol liked to use the silkscreen process because he enjoyed the idea of advertising, and he enjoyed the idea of an image becoming repeated over and over again until it finally starts to break down. And a good subject for him for this idea was celebrity, and Marilyn Monroe was probably the biggest celebrity of this time period, someone that everyone in the United States and other countries knew when they saw her photograph. He takes that image of the celebrity and repeats it over and over and over again with the silkscreen process. And as he repeats the image, the matrix or the stencils used to make it start to break down, and you can see that the image quality starts to degrade. And in some ways, that's a comparison at what happens when someone becomes famous, because, as you guys know, fame and fortune they're supposed to be the top rung of our society. The thing that people really strive and reach for is to be well known and be someone glamorous, like a famous actress or performer. But once you get there, people can't wait to tear you down, because then you see all the articles in the news about one time when a previous relationship you had and what they had to say about it, or you did something wrong to your kids, or you're a tax evader, or whatever evil that you happen to possess. People can't wait to tear down the famous. So as much as they wanted to build them up, they can't wait to tear them back down. And kind of the same thing happens visually with this piece by Warhol. 30 is another example of Warhol's work. This is a screen print of a photograph called Race Riot. Warhol was very interested in what was going on in TV, what was going on in media, and how that functioned as artwork. So many times he would take shots like this one that appear to be a screenshot from some event that was taking place and probably being filmed by a news crew, and blow it up and turn it into artwork to see what kind of effect it has. One of Warhol's most famous pieces, his series of Campbell soup cans, and looking at it from a distance, you recognize the can, the red and white, and if you look closely, you'll notice that one is beef and one is cream of mushroom, but really it's all kind of the same thing. You know, once you open it up and look at it, it may have a slightly different flavor, but that's all kind of the same thing. And maybe that was the point that Warhol was trying to make with these cans. Warhol himself was a very interesting character, and just like he paid a lot of attention to media and television, media paid a lot of attention to him too, and he was a person that was famous for being famous in some ways. The last slide, 32, if you click on that link, it'll take you to a piece of a presentation called Day in the Life of Andy Warhol, and check it out. He was quite a character. On Monday, I want to share a film with you. It's about a painter named Jean-Michel Basquiat, and part of the way he becomes very famous in the 1980s is through knowing and interacting with Andy Warhol in New York City. So, hey, have a great weekend and be safe out there. Keep the people of Gatlinburg in your thoughts as they go through this terrible time of fires and destruction, and that's just a very tragic event that we see happen sometimes, and this will happen fairly close to home. So keep those people in your thoughts, and donate something if you can. I'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Hey, how about one more special effect? Let's see what this does. Oh, bird. See you later.